The world around us is hostile to the Word of God and to biblical values, but we are called to be salt and light, to stand for truth in a decaying culture. We are not called to run from the fire, but be willing to step into the fire. God has placed you at this time in history on purpose and for a purpose. Join us as we get better equipped to address civics and culture from a biblical worldview. Welcome to Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church. Let's welcome our hosts, Debi and Sam Ariza.
Today's topic is, should church and state be separate? And I'm joined by Alison Furno, who was a previous co-host of this show and also helps me lead the civics ministry here at Dream City Church. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. This is a great topic.
Yes, and especially right now, it's funny because we already kind of planned on talking about this, and then just the things that are happening right now, it feels like this is on a lot of people's radar. Lots of conversations, both pros and cons, about that topic. So it's a good thing to talk about, I think.
Yeah.
So the first thing, what we hear a lot is using a verse in Romans 13, which I'll let you read in a second, but that is often, I think, misinterpreted, misused to claim that Christians shouldn't be involved in anything political, that they should not be involved in civics. And so what does that verse say, and how is it sort of used as a way to keep people out?
Yeah, so I think a really important point that you just made was that context is really important in the Bible, right? That you cannot take a single verse without understanding the beginning of the context and the end of the context and what was the writer intending to get across. And so this here, we're going to read the first couple verses of Romans 13. It says, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves." Now, this sounds very serious that, our authorities and our leaders are appointed by God. So if they are, then why do we need to do anything? Because realistically, this is something said a lot within the church. God's in control. God will take care of it. He knows God is sovereign, right? So why should we at all have anything to do with the political process?
Right.
And I think that's almost the blind obedience that Christians have to everything in the government, because they don't think getting involved, one, will make a difference, and two, will change, whatever it is that they think is there, and not understanding that God put us on this earth to go and make disciples, to go in the world, right? To go work with these people, to go help these people. How are we supposed to minister or help anyone if we are not in the place where they work, where they live, and in our communities, right? And so I think that it is really a blind faith that keeps people out of something that they don't want to deal with, because being involved in the political space is hard. In civics and just in understanding what's going on. When you know what's going on, it's hard, right? You see the evil, you see the deception. And so I think Christians turn a blind eye to that because it's easier to say, God's in control.
Right. Yes. And I think, too, you were talking about context, right? So Romans was written by Paul, right? Okay, so Paul also, and I think, it's like, yes, we are supposed to be obedient to governing authorities, to laws, but not to the point of doing things that are contrary to our faith, right?
Yes.
I mean, you even look at, like, Ahab, who was an authority over Israel and was doing wicked things, and they Jezebel was taken out, and Ahab, they stood up to Ahab in what he was doing, because they were worshiping Baal and worshiping Asherah and all those things, right? So even in that context of the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament, one of the things, I just had it, where'd it go? In Acts, so this is again Paul, what had been arrested with, I'm trying to remember which time this was. He had been arrested, and he basically tells them, the jailer came, and this is it right here. So this is in Acts 16, down in verse 35. So they had imprisoned Paul, right? And then they didn't realize that he was a Roman citizen, and they went to go let him go. And in 35, when it was daylight, the magistrates sent their officers to the jailer with the order, release those men. The jailer told Paul, the magistrates have ordered that you and Silas be released. Now you can go, leave in peace. This is the verse right here. So 37 says, but Paul said to the officers, they beat us publicly without a trial, even though we're Roman citizens, and they threw us in prison. And now they want to get rid of us quietly? No, let them come themselves and escort us out. So it was like the government had mistreated them and taken their liberties away unjustly. And instead of he didn't just bow down to that, he stood up and said, no, you guys are wrong and you need to come make this right. He used his authority that he had as a citizen, right, his citizenship, to stand up to these government authorities. This is the same person that's talking in that. So there's clearly a contextual thing going on, right? That it's not saying that we just don't do anything, like what you were talking about.
Right. And it's exactly what you're saying. Christians are called to respect government authority, but not blind obedience to, particularly, as you said, particularly when it contradicts Christian beliefs.
Right.
So that's the key that we have to look at. There's always a point in being respectful, but that doesn't mean, and a lot of times we see at the local level for sure, when people are not following the law. So if people are not following the law, that's another reason for us to get engaged and get involved, right?
Right.
So even if we have a proper law, there are lots of people who don't follow it.
Right.
And it's our job to be that salt and light in our communities.
Right. So basically, it doesn't give us an excuse either direction, right? It doesn't give us an excuse to behave badly.
Right.
And it doesn't give us an excuse to just sit back and do nothing when things are going on that are wrong.
Right. And I think it's something that, honestly, in churches, it's constantly justified. People use the sovereignty of God to justify anything, to justify themselves even not being involved, right? Like I said, God is sovereign. Don't worry about it. God knows. God has a plan. And although that is true, that doesn't justify us not doing our part. We can see all throughout the Bible that these people were engaged in civic activity.
Right.
They were all involved in government. They were all involved in making their communities, telling their communities about God.
Well, because God used Esther to change things in government policy. He used Daniel. He used Nehemiah. Like all of these there's story after story. It's really difficult. This is one of the things that I struggle with, understanding that mentality, because if you read through the Bible, especially the Old Testament, you see a lot over and over again about people of God having influence and impacting what was happening in the government sphere. Joseph, you could name a whole bunch of them, right? Ezra, and there were just a bunch of different people that had an impact on what was going on around them, because they weren't supposed to just sit back and do nothing.
Right.
They were supposed to be salt and light in wherever they were, right? Including in the government. Yeah. I just lost my train of thought.
It's, kind of to your point, it's learned helplessness within the church. I've learned to be helpless in my community around me because I don't know how, or I don't think it's valid or important for my voice to impact anything. And really that is really something from the enemy. Yeah. I mean, it's something where if you can, we talk about this kind of stuff all the time, that if the enemy can just distract you long enough to make it seem like your voice doesn't matter, you will sit there idle and watch evil happen in front of you and justify it by saying God has a plan.
Right.
And that's not the way that the Bible was written. That is not God's intention for our creation. Our intention is to go out and preach the gospel, make disciples, make our community a better place.
Have
dominion over. Yeah.
I think that's a key thing, because it's like, okay, we need to understand our place. God is sovereign over, but again, we're having prayer. If we're praying and having discernment to be in the right place at the right time, because that's a big part of it. I think a lot of people are fighting the wrong battle, right? You get where they're really loud on something that is not exactly, you also have to understand where God is moving and how he is, what he's doing. And you've seen this rise up, with we talked about this in a different episode, but that, you saw the flip on the gender issue, right? Where you had for a long time, it was like nobody was saying anything. And it was just, you had to use pronouns, you had to accept all this stuff, you had to accept boys and girls' locker rooms, and you had, little, like, young girls going off on school trips and being put in a hotel room with a boy who thinks he's a girl, and parents weren't notified, and, you had all this craziness going on, or whether it was kids getting mutilated by surgery, by hormones, by those kind of things that were just so clearly wrong, and the church, for the most part, was silent on it. And then all of a sudden, there started to be this swell of people standing up and saying, no, this is not right. This is wrong. And things flipped, right? You had this shift in what happened so we do see where it's like God's moving in certain arenas. And if we're not paying attention to what those are and what's happening around us and where it's time, we miss those, moments like Joseph and Esther and even David, facing down Goliath, different things where God prepares moments for us to take a stand. And if we're not paying attention, we miss those.
Right. And really to the heart of that point, I feel like is our identity should be solely found in God, right? And who he created us to be, who he called us to be. And so often we want to help, but we might not even know, well, God, how do you want to use me? What is it?
Yes.
What is it that you gave me that I can go out and inspire other people and inspire that change? And so if we have our identity in God and we ground it in that, in his word, but then through that, what is it that you gave me?
Yes.
Right? That's how we're going to be able to see real impacts, because when you see people living in that space where I was created to do this, God gave me this talent, this skill, this ability, then that's where you see real effective change and real effective leadership,
Right. Well, I mean, we saw that with Charlie Kirk, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was what he did. He stepped out and had that, just was obedient and spoke up on these difficult issues that people that were all, for the most part, almost all of them were very clearly biblical.
Right.
And so it's that taking a stand and being, the here am I, send me, right?
Right.
And so, and again, I think with that too, I want to say one thing that this, one of the accusations too with that is that makes us Christian nationalists. What do you say about that?
That's
in 30 seconds. No.
Yeah. There was a lot of comments on social media posts.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people trying to change the truth. And, when you look at, this is what's kind of crazy to me, is that it's anything that really perverts the truth is always something that's so close to it. It's kind of like close. It doesn't, when you think of something evil, you think of seeing this scary monster with black nails and something crazy, but the enemy is so tricky. And so like things like this are used where, you have the word Christian in there. So then it ties Christianity to like a cult, like, you know what I mean? Like this horrible, and you're like, whoa. And so these words are thrown around when people really don't know what they mean.
Which it wasn't a thing until like COVID. I don't remember ever hearing that term.
No, and what's crazy is people use this and it's a thing because when you really look at the core of these people that hate Christianity, that hate God, they are so lost.
Right.
They're so lost. They don't know who they are, and they're struggling to find purpose. And the only way you find purpose when you allow the enemy to take over is through anger, through deceit, through lies, right? And so really just trying to take this truth and skew it.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, Christians have historically been persecuted all throughout, all of these different times. And something that we see when you talk about the early Christians being persecuted in Rome in the Colosseum, right? They would have Christians, beaten to death and stabbed and all of these different things. But the more that happened, the more that revival started to come, because people realized, why are you persecuting these people?
Yeah.
Why are you attacking these people? They didn't do anything wrong. And so the more you see persecution happening, it's directly connected to revival in the country.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that that's something that it's almost like a sign that you realize when somebody's attacking you and trying to skew you and your name, you're being effective.
Right.
Because they did that to Jesus.
Right.
They literally did that to Jesus. And I still can't get the picture out of my head where you see Jesus is here and the Pharisees are like, this guy is fake. Right. And then they go back into their temples and they're praying to God. And they're like, God, help me do this, help me do that, help me, push all of my own selfish agendas while Jesus is in front of them. They can't even see it because they're so blinded.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of people are today.
Yeah.
They think they're doing the right thing, but they have the heart that's farthest from God,
Yeah. And so then with that, also is that another argument is that that there should be a separation of church and state that's in our Constitution. It's one of those things that, the First Amendment says, we can't have religion in government. And so it's the separation of church and state, and also saying that, the First Amendment says that you can't have, that religion and government should be separate.
Yeah, so there's a couple of really important points there. First, talking about the Establishment Clause, it prohibits government establishing a religion, right? That's the context. So prohibiting a government to establish religion is not the same as what we're talking about here. So it does not ban religion in public voices, in life, in culture, and community, right?
Right.
The second part here, so in 1801, the Danbury Baptist Association wrote Thomas Jefferson and said, we are concerned about our religious liberties. They had a concern with this. Now, I find this hilarious that he didn't respond until 1802 because how long it takes probably to get messages back and forth. We send a message in 5 minutes and it's there instantly. And so it took him an entire year, but I think that was pretty normal back then. So Thomas Jefferson's response was the wall of separation between church and state was meant to protect churches from government overreach, right? And so not the other way around. His intent was not to keep religion out of politics, but to keep the federal government from controlling or establishing religion.
Yes.
Because he knew that the federal government was not the place for religion.
Right.
And so people mess this up all of the time thinking like, oh, well, they're just supposed to be separate. God forbid you read the entire article. I mean, these people that write these things, they're not, again, we talk about context. You need to know the context of, and this letter is not official government. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in the Declaration. It's a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association from Thomas Jefferson.
Of him trying to alleviate their fears that the government would come down and interfere with what they were doing.
Right. So the context is so important because people say this like it's,
right,
enshrined in America. And I'm like, well.
Well, and even with the First Amendment, right, they don't finish the sentence, right? Because it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Mm-hmm. So it's like that the government cannot say you have to be this religion. And one of the reasons that was in there was because that was what was happening in England, where people couldn't freely worship because they were told they had to be a certain type of Christianity.
Right.
Based on what the king said. And so that was what they were trying to, they weren't telling people you're not allowed to be believers because that wasn't what was happening.
Right.
And especially when you think that, our country was founded on religious freedom. I mean, that was a huge part of the founding. We've talked about that before. There's lots of information on that, but that it's very clear between both that letter and even just reading the whole entire First Amendment. Yeah. that is also not actually a thing. But it is something that a lot of people are confused about. They think it's real. They think there's not supposed to be that. And it's one of the things that people get attacked by, and also one of the things that I think Christians feel like, oh, well, I just am not supposed to do that. Right. And I do think for the most part Christians are law-abiding, and they want to do what's right, and so they feel like they're doing something wrong if they step out when they're not. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And we saw that even, so one real quick thing, the Johnson Amendment. So we had that, the change, I mean, that's now, there's been a progression, right? We saw in early America where churches were super involved, and then it got to the point where they instilled the Johnson Amendment and told churches you're not allowed to say anything. And now we've kind of swung back from that. So just to add a little bit of context in on that process of how we went from complete freedom to do anything to being stifled to now kind of taking that back.
Yeah, I think, to your point with everything happening, churches are so scared to, and they have been for a while, scared to speak up because they think that they're going to get their nonprofit status removed, right?
Which I'm thankful that ours is not, but...
Right. But
there are very few like us, like our church, that have been bold.
Yeah. And so churches all across America, for one reason or another, maybe they're, they don't have the doctrine, or they're nervous about losing their nonprofit status, have said, well, I'm just not going to talk about anything relevant happening in culture, anything relevant happening in politics, or anything that could, make it that I'm not just strictly speaking from the Bible. But the Bible is a living document that is meant to be interpreted, right? Like, we have to interpret the Bible to help us understand how do we handle what's going on right now. And so when we're talking about, this shift that's happening, so we are, the IRS, everything, we are able to talk about what's going on now, to where before it was like, well, if you say this, if you endorse a president, if you endorse this, if you endorse that, you could lose your status, which never was enforced. And you've talked about that a lot, how no church has ever lost their C3 status because of speaking up about anything having to do with the political place. But there's also so much that is already nonpartisan. So nonpartisan meaning it's not Republican or Democrat, right? It's you have a bunch of different local races, propositions, all of these things that churches can always have been able to and always will be able to say, hey, you should vote no on this proposition because it goes against our biblical principles, right?
We did that with the abortion one here. Yeah.
Right. And so I think that churches should not be afraid to say anything. They should not be afraid to create voter guides for their church, especially values-based. I know our church did a really good job with our, explaining the values of the parties and what they say on their websites, how they express and identify themselves, so that the people at the church know voting is a process that Christians should be involved in. And I heard a stat today nationally that 1/3 of people sitting inside a church are voting. 1/3.
That's appalling.
Right. And 1/3 of them aren't even registered. And so when you're looking at this, it's like, what is going on there? The Bible clearly explains our involvement in government. And there is a gap between what is being taught and how we should be engaging in the civic process.
Right.
And so the status of what we can do now is we can openly speak about our beliefs when it comes to the political space.
Right.
In church, pastors in church, you can go out and boldly profess your belief and your faith when it comes to culture, to everything that is going on, and you should not be afraid.
Right.
You should not be afraid of the government. You shouldn't be afraid of the backlash from your people. You shouldn't be afraid of anything other than, God, am I following what you called me to do?
Right.
Our fear should be in making sure that we are taking the responsibility that God gave us as leaders, and we are establishing what he wants us to establish.
Yeah.
And if our fear is not in that, then it's in the wrong place.
Right. And then as far as with the people being apathetic too, it's like, I think sometimes people don't know where to start, right? They don't know how to get started in that process of being equipped and being, because there's two sides of it. I think one is that things do tend to get kind of ugly, right? And they're like, okay, I don't want to, because there is definitely a lot of ugly stuff that goes on in the political realm.
Absolutely.
But that we can be in that, it says we're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world, right? So we are supposed to be impacting, and Pastor Luke always talks about us being a thermostat rather than a thermometer, that we're supposed to be setting the temperature rather than allowing it to affect us. So that is true with the political landscape as well, right? That we're supposed to be affecting what's happening in our city, in our school board, in our state, and then it trickles up into the nation. And I think we tend to get that backwards. We talk a lot about that, both Civics Ministry and this podcast, about that the focus shouldn't be necessarily on the national, like not that we ignore it, but that we have the most impact locally. but people don't know how to get started,
Right.
which is then again where salt comes in, right?
Right.
So in Matthew 5, it talks about right after all of the Beatitudes and being persecuted and all of that, Jesus tells the disciples to go be salt and light. That salt has to change. If salt loses its saltiness, it's worthless, right? So if we are losing our saltiness, that we're supposed to be impacting and preserving culture, right? Salt is a preservative. It's also a healing agent. It's all kinds of things. And if we are not using that salt out in the world, then what are we doing, right? Or it also talks about hiding your light under a basket, because we're not shining it out in these places that are clearly very dark and need the impact of the church and of believers just speaking up on what's right. And so with that, you and I both work on a project called SALT. And so why don't you explain that and how you can be involved with it, even whether you're at Dream City, we use that stuff here.
Right.
But also if you're at a different church anywhere in the country, really, you could use this program to help you to bring that salt and teach Christians, other friends of yours, people in your sphere of influence, how to be salt.
Yeah.
Light.
So what churches can do and what we do at this church is we have a civics ministry. So the first piece of SALT is it helps you build a civics ministry within your church. So something that is from the people at the church, right? Something that somebody says, hey, I want to get involved. I want to know how this stuff works and what I can do to be a better citizen. And what SALT does is gives you easy monthly trainings where you can say, what is going on in culture and what is the biblical relevance that tells us how to respond,
yes.
Right? And so that's the training piece. And then there's always an action step, like what's something I can learn today, take away from today, that I learn who my city council members are, or I learn who's on my school board, or I, figure out if something is going on that we don't want to go on, who do I contact? How do I, make a difference? And so it's a really great program. You can do it within your church. You can do it within a Bible study or a small group at your house. We have small groups all across Arizona. And so it's a really great way for you to take your faith into the public square and say, this is a way that I can connect those dots and start to learn what is relevant in the Bible that helps pull out, how we should respond in culture today.
Yeah. And I think one of the misunderstandings, I think both of civics ministry and others, we're not trying to find the political people that are already engaged, because if they're already engaged, great. Like they're doing their thing, they're good. We're trying to help regular, everyday Christians who just know that stuff is happening, but they don't really know what they can do about it, and they don't know how to have conversations with their neighbor or with their whoever cuts their hair, or at the gym. You were talking about your mom, right? Having interactions with people at the gym who shut her down, she was trying to have a conversation about just Christianity and they shut her down. So having these conversations, we've all experienced that, right? Where you're talking to somebody or somebody says something to you and you just don't know how to respond. Mm-hmm. You don't feel like you know enough about the topic. Mm-hmm. You don't really know where to go from there, or you see something happening in your city or in your school district just that you know is wrong, but you don't know what to do about it. That's the goal of this, is to just try to help equip and empower everyday believers to just be a little bit more able to go out and be confident to be salt and light.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that we want more people to get involved in. People know that it's important, but it's a very complicated process if you're not involved in it. So we want to make that easy, simple, and something that anybody can be involved in.
Yeah, that's great. So, and anything else you want to add to any of this? I feel like we've covered most of it. Was there anything on your notes that we did not cover?
No, we covered everything. I mean, I can always talk more, but
Yeah, I think we're good. And we, so if you're at a Dream City location, you can contact us by emailing civics@dreamcitychurch.us. That's a really nice, easy email.
Yeah.
And be part of what we're doing with civics ministry here at Dream City. And if you are somewhere else at a different church in a different city, then you can contact about SALT and get something like what we're doing here and take that into your church or your friend group or your mom's group or your, get 3 other married couples or whatever you want to do, right? And take this, it can be any size group. It can be just a very small group of people that meets in a coffee shop or a living room, and it could also be done on a larger scale like what we do here at Dream City.
Yes. And I think the last thing that you can do with this that we do here is having voter registrations at your church is a huge thing. Having just simply the election dates.
Right.
So that people know when the elections are at your church. And, even if you don't have a full-blown ministry, you can ask the admin, ask your pastor, like, hey, I have just the election dates. Yeah. Can we share these with the people so that they know, they don't forget?
Yes.
And just making sure that people know the super, super basics is so helpful and so, so impactful. And we really want Christians to impact culture, and we want them
past that 1/3.
Yeah, we need to get past that 1/3.
That's pathetic.
Yeah. So that's the goal, and I think it really helps bring faith to a whole new level, because when faith without works is dead, right? So it's like we want our faith to not just be in our personal lives, but to be in the action that we take every single day to try to make our communities a better place.
Yeah. And with that, I was thinking, just as a final note, what I did years and years ago before there ever was a civics ministry, I was a stay-at-home mom, and I would do just what you're talking about, right? Where I was like, okay, I want to make sure my friends are registered to vote, these other moms that were in my sphere of influence, and make sure they know when the election dates are. The primaries are super important, and nobody pays attention to those, and that's even a worse voter turnout than the general election. Mm-hmm. And I was saying something in a staff meeting recently, but that this coming election in 2026 is a midterm election everywhere across the country, but specifically in Arizona. There's not any federal, there's like the U.S. Congress on there, but it's not a president, none of that is on there. And so people don't pay as much attention to it.
Right.
But those statewide and local races are very important, and it's got a much lower voter turnout. And so if we could just activate Christians sitting in churches across the country, across Arizona, and then in other states as well, to go out and vote their values and know what they're doing, we could really change some state level and local level politics to make it better. And then that filters up nationally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been fun.
Yeah,
you
sure
and I
has.
can sit here and chat for a long time.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church.
You can listen to this podcast on Apple and Spotify, and follow us on social media to find all the info on the show notes. To learn more about Dream City Church, visit our website at dreamcitychurch.us. Thanks for listening.